I'm Mark Teglin, President and CEO of Calvin Community. Calvin is a faith-based, not-for-profit retirement community providing a continuum of care in Des Moines' Beaverdale neighborhood. For more than 50 years, Calvin has offered individualized care by a team of dedicated professionals. As part of our mission to serve older adults, we have partnered with several community, business, and not-for-profit organizations and 6 professional experts. This program is brought to you by Calvin Community and American Enterprise Group with support from the Comparison Project at Drake University, Broadlawns Medical Center, Cultivating Compassion, the Dr. Richard Deming Foundation, Arbor Springs, AARP, Westminster Presbyterian Church, and Polk County Board of Supervisors, and additional support from Severson Strege and Company, Des Moines Pastoral Counseling Center, Des Moines Area Religious Council, and HCI Care Services. In this session, Joel Olah, Executive Director at Aging Resources of Central Iowa, discusses turning conversation to action when it comes to family caregiving. He covers population dynamics and caregiving, the case for caregiving, family dynamics and having the conversation, and caregiving resources.
We're going to set the stage, we're going to tee it up, and then let's play the game. That's kind of like how this session will go. So relax, enjoy, not too much, don't want you to fall asleep, but by the same token, this is kind of very good information, I think, that I want to put into your hands. It's the latest stuff that we have, and I hope that it is going to be informative as well as enjoyable. So we're going to talk about the big picture first. We're going to talk about that big picture, the dynamics of population, how does it fit? And we're going to make a case for caregiving in general, how it looks, what are the dynamics in that. Then we're going to talk about the family situation. It might be a dialogue between you and a parent or some other family member. And lastly, those are the resources. Family caregiving in our society is an extraordinary gift, because the value of this in terms of just dollars and cents matches almost the output of Walmart. And we're talking about over 40 million people that are delivering that caregiving every day, sometimes 24/7 if we're talking about an Alzheimer's person. I think one of the things we should be aware of is how our population is moving ahead. And these diagrams here kind of give you a visual of how our population was structured and how it's moving differently today. You'll notice on the slide to the right here, you're beginning to see the boomers coming on board. You remember those people born between 1946 and 1964. That's how we bracket the boomers. And as this population moves through that spectrum, there will be many changes, and you can see that as it moves up. And how important that is when we look at the numbers, because those numbers are going to be the caregiving process and how it's going to be stressed or strained in terms of just raw numbers of people to help this population as it moves through. So we're talking right now that in terms of the ratio of caregiver to patient or caregiver to person, it's about 7-to-1 and it's declining. And so the critical point here is that as we're going through the most needy time, and that those are people in their 80s and better, for healthcare delivery and caregiving, the number of people to back us up is going down. That's what's important to see in this particular slide. This is not just here in our country, but it's worldwide. The most important one is here. It's the 85 and over group, because that is accelerated in its growth, and that holds, of course, the key to all of those things about caregiving that we're going to talk about. And another picture is chronic disease. Remember today, that's what takes us down, is chronic disease, not the infectious diseases of the past, because we've conquered some of those things, at least in our country. And you can see the various processes of chronic disease, and you can see ones that are in prevalence, starting with heart disease and going down to cancer. You notice where Alzheimer's is here. That's moving up. Here is what I was talking about earlier, that even though we might have chronic disease, we do have means to control that, and that is exercise, diet, physical activity, watching our smoking and drinking habits, all of that stuff. You know, it's rather strange, isn't it, that there's something that we can do about it, and yet we fall into it. We want a pill that can transform it rather than work at it. And this is kind of a mindset thing that we need to kind of overcome, that this chronic disease process doesn't have to be painful and limiting if we change our lifestyle. Now, let's get into the second section here, and this is talking more about the differences in generations and how people respond. And we can say that a lot of people want to stay home and be cared for at home and grow and develop at home. But the issue, of course, is that it's a different generation. They're not as compliant. What does that mean? It's a challenge for the caregiver if they're going to fight you. See, the boomers are not exactly easy people. We're not. We tend to be smartasses sometimes. We know better. And that makes it very challenging for caregivers when you have that attitude that we've read that, I went online, I know that's right. Wow, that's a change. Because the traditional, the great generation, when they looked at that white coat, it was yes doctor and no doctor. Huh. Not today. And you can expect that to change as well. Now, this is a representation of all the different generations that are out there and how they're categorized by the social scientists. Why is it important? Well, it's important to know a little bit about the traits and general characteristics of this generation. Do you know who put this together? Manpower, the largest employment agency in the world, because they know how important this is in the workplace and how the different generations interact with one another, sometimes positively and sometimes negatively. But in order to understand that is to understand the working dynamic and making people, working together to accomplish the goal. So that's kind of like why they did this. So what we'll present is just kind of ideas about just general characteristics. They don't necessarily define you, but they characterize you, okay? And the great generation, boy, look at that. We're talking about the generation going through the Great Depression, the Second World War, those kinds of values, saving rather than spending. They value hard work. They like that personal touch. Those are the kinds of things that characterize this great generation. The boomers, however, are a little bit different. They are not the savers, they are the spenders. And that they've grown up with television and all these wonderful things that just mushroomed after the Second World War because they were times of prosperity. And they are a little different in terms of how they respond to people and interact. Let's go into the Generation X. Now, a little bit different too. They are a little more like the traditional generation in their spending habits, a little more conservative. They've grown up with more electronic communication, and that they're very comfortable with that. They're a little indifferent to authority. They don't kind of respect it in the manner in which the great generation does. So it's something for us to work with as they go through their lifestyle. And again, these are general characteristics, but I think it's something that does have value in order to understand that process. And the millennials, they're the generation most likely to be the caregivers for the boomers as they hit the 80s and so forth. So it's something to look at. They're very, very technically savvy. The last one that's out there, they really haven't termed the Generation Z yet. Most likely they're going to be called the iGens or the Digitarians because they're so into technology that I worry that they are not going to be able to communicate on a personal level. So that's something of a challenge that we're going to have to work with this generation as they go through too. But I think the bottom line, no matter what generation we're talking about, no matter what pattern of communication we're talking about. Aretha Franklin said it well, R-E-S-P-E-C-T. If we remember that very, very basic principle, that we can see that that will work no matter what generation we're talking about. Today, the average caregiver is a 49-year-old female who is engaged in the workforce and has dependents or children. That's the average caregiver. And the typical caregiver age range now is between 45 and 49, but that's the average if you take a snapshot. So there's also been a shift from rural to urban America, which of course isolates generations, and you find that the people that are left in the rural areas are more likely to be the older generation rather than the younger generation. Mary Alice and I were talking about how care has changed so much. The care that's being given today in the home 10 to 15 years ago used to be called skilled nursing care. But today it's being done by people in the family, whether that be IVs or ostomy or whatever it is. They're doing that care in the home for a different generation. But the important thing is, on the right-hand side of that slide, it says that over 60% of them learned it as they were moving along. They weren't given the expertise that they probably should have had, so they're sort of learning as they're going along. What should be the case, of course, is we should have that expertise before they are sent home, and people should be kind of comfortable with that. But that's not the way it's happening today. When we said 40 million people, over 40 million people are family caregivers, we're talking about 34 to 35 million that are taking care of people that are older. And those 10 to 12 million people are taking care of people 50 and under, especially those with special needs children. So again, something, that total picture of care. Roughly 75% of family caregiving lasts about 5 years, and the rest, 25%, are more than 5 years. You can see here that the family caregiver provides about 25 hours per week, and if it's a spouse, it's much more like 45 hours per week. There's a dynamic in care, and I want you to see this as not necessarily 7 solid things that don't move. There's a great deal of dynamic here in terms of care. So one begins caregiving, in a sense, kind of casually, taking care of the groceries, doing certain tasks around the house. And then it soon develops into something much more involved and complicated. And again, you're kind of invading somebody's space, so there's some give and take here that you should see as people progress in caregiving. And so as more is demanded of you, that you're going to have to make an investment. You'll reach a point where you will have to bring in professional assistance to assist your efforts. And again, that's going to cause some difficulties in family dynamics, because some people just don't want anybody other than family messing in the house. It's very frustrating for caregivers in the family to deal with this. So know that this is a very dynamic, fluid situation as you move from less intense care to more intense care, to more formalized care, to institutional care. So that's what these steps kind of have in them as you approach that avenue. A lot of times there's almost a knee-jerk response that some of the medical providers have when they have a patient come in with their family members. They say, well, you should talk about assisted living, almost before they've even talked about in-home care or talked to the person about what they would want. And remember that the medical community isn't exactly as knowledgeable as one would hope they are in terms of geriatric care. It's not taught very well, sometimes not much at all. And so they're not aware of the other various avenues and approaches in the community. And so when we talk about assisted living, it might not be the most appropriate, and certainly it might be one of the most expensive routes, that some family members cannot afford. So again, knowledge here is important as a caregiver. That's why we're kind of spending a little time talking about some of the options, which we'll talk about as we move through. Also, and I'm just going to have one slide on this, these are the paid caregivers. These are the professional or whatever caregivers. And so know that there are over 4 million paid caregivers. They are our nursing home health aides, they're nursing assistants, personal care aides, and all that stuff. Rock solid. And again, we have difficulty finding people to fill these roles. And maybe the reason why we find it difficult is because we don't value them. The slide there, the material that you see falling down here, we can put it in the negative too, that if we're not providing a living wage, we're not providing enough benefits, we're not providing opportunities for advancement, we're not having mentoring going on, we're not having people that provide guidance and care with these people as they're creating a career path and a profession. That's why it's hard to find people to fill these roles. And it will be increasingly difficult to do that unless we use the positive. So if we're serious about fulfilling this gap in our care delivery system, we have to be serious about treating these individuals with the professional respect that they deserve. And let me make a suggestion. For those people who like to condemn some of the immigrants that are flowing back and forth, I ask you this question. Would you like to be cared for by someone that comes from a culture that values aging and respects it or not? Think about some of the cultures that these individuals come from and how they treat older individuals in their society. About 50% of the hourly and 33% of the salaried individuals that are out there providing care are not given the flexibility that they should have to manage both the work and the caregiving. And it creates huge strains on people. Certainly we do have the Family and Medical Leave Act, but that doesn't help those people who need to work. It leaves a gap. And there are very few pilot programs out there today that, in a sense, work with people that are providing care and support them in the working environment. So that when you have people that are performing some very complicated and involved things, and they're also expected to be performing well on the job, sometimes there's a disconnect. And people wind up quitting their job or taking an early retirement or whatever in order to manage the caregiving that takes place. There are some kind of hopes out there in terms of technology that may help us manage some of these things you're certainly aware of, but maybe not applied to caregiving. They're improving the monitoring devices in the home in all sorts of ways, you know, between turning off a stove if it's on too long or having a software program built into the television to kind of measure a person's intellectual capacity and so forth. But a lot of these programs, these monitoring devices, are extremely expensive. And so we're hoping that that will drop a little bit so that these things can be utilized more effectively and more generally in the home. Medication management devices have been out there for a while, but the current ones are much better. They're more engaging than the ones of the past, so we can expect those things to improve. And how many have been noticing the grocery stores? They're providing online shopping assistance. Uber certainly is providing transportation that was not there before. We will forget about what happened in Kalamazoo temporarily. But nonetheless, that is an important development too in terms of getting people around, because transportation is a significant area of need. There's all sorts of new services that are coming online in terms of home maintenance for people that need that, and of course, online healthcare, whether we talk about telemed or whatever, those things will be coming on board, hopefully helping family members who are caring for people to understand the dynamic of their care and to do a better job of that care. There's the CARE Act, which is an act to, in a sense, enhance the work of the caregiver in the family and make them part of that medical team, work them in. This map shows you what states have adopted the CARE Act, those that are thinking about doing it, and those that are still sleeping. Here's an interesting finding. Over 80% of physicians are not adequately prepared to treat individuals with Alzheimer's or dementia, and that about 25% of them are not very sophisticated in handling multiple chronic diseases. This is something that we need to improve in our medical education in order for those physicians to be a little more expert in that area. And one thing we have to protect, of course, is caregiver burnout. Very important. Because the better the quality of the caregiver, the better the quality of care. And of course, depression is linked very closely with caregiving at all levels. Okay, one of the things that has not been done yet is we haven't taken a careful look at caregiving generally, nationally. And these questions are questions that have yet to be answered significantly enough. Who assesses the caregiver? It just happens? How are they doing? How are they managing these skilled nursing tasks? Good, bad, indifferent? Are they able to continue to provide care? When I talk to medical students, I often say, are you looking at the caregiver behind the patient? Are you looking at the changes that you see in that person? Because they're part of the process too. And if you see something, you need to kind of intervene here to ask them at least how they're doing and can they manage? And are they aware of, are they skilled enough to handle the balance of the care plan? And they sat me down and said, Pops, we need to talk about aging in place. And I said, aging in place of what? See, there's a little gap there in terms of what we're talking about. Parents may base their decisions in healthcare on independence and comfort, where the adult children may be more concerned about the parents' health and safety. And you can see that if they're not on the same frequency, how it's going to be a little bit difficult for them to be managed. And think about what we said about differences in generation. If you think this generation, the great generation, is going to be tough to manage, just wait. The fun is about to begin. So, in terms of resources, AARP has some great resources, and their caregiving center recommends when you kind of get into this caregiving thing to kind of have a conversation about what you would want to happen well in advance of the crisis that might happen. And so to take advantage of those times in life where we're going to think about that. So the adult child, in a sense, talking to the parents about what would you like? How would you like to see this go? There are a number of advanced directives, there's the wills, there's all of that stuff. But it also says, what would you like to happen? How would you like this to go? AARP provides a couple of devices here, and that's, you can map it out, what needs to be done. And caregiving can take a variety of forms. Sometimes you're a long-distance caregiver. Be prepared for guilt trips. A spousal caregiver, we talked about, much more involved, many more hours, and it's intense. The working caregiver, we talked about the average caregiver being a 49-year-old female in the workforce with dependents. And then the sandwich generation, which we have today, you're taking care of kids and you're taking care of parents at the same time. It's important for the caregiver sometimes to take a break, to get away. That's what respite's all about. This is a great resource under the agingcare.com. This comes from that same resource. Look over here in the blue. And this is when, these are flags. When you think somebody needs some help. If you look at the categories, the physical things start to change a little bit. The home environment, things aren't quite what they were. The emotional overlays that are kind of unusual, out of character. some of the cognitive things that are going on, and a variety of other issues. Gets into a little bit of the advanced directives, but in a kind of a positive way. And let's just kind of read through from top to bottom so that hopefully you can see it on your copy. These are the 5 wishes, and I think they're kind of simple, but you know, they're very impactful when you hear them. The person I want to make care decisions for me when I can't. You can fill in the blank. The kind of medical treatment I want, but most importantly, what I don't want. And of course, the dynamic when you get into the caregiving stuff and when you take the steps to provide the care, you know something, it ain't going to go so well a lot of times. It's going to be very difficult. How to express this? You're dealing with adults, not children, and they're adult people and they know what they want. And so it's going to be sometimes very difficult to bridge that and say, you know, there's something that needs to be helped here, but I'm going to listen to you, but I think you kind of need some help. And that process of articulating and the dialogue and the communication is the foundation of good caregiving. Let's say that there is a system out there under the Older Americans Act. You've all heard about Meals on Wheels, right? I hope you have. And that's part of this whole initiative that started in 1965. In addition to the meals, there's a whole set of services that are out there and a whole set of services that are there for caregivers. And you can see just how large a picture that is. The area agencies in this case, because I'm a director of one of those 629, we have 6 in our state that provide that service. And we'll explain what those services are. There's the 6. Okay? And you can see there are websites and so forth. I would encourage you to at least look at the ELDERCARE locator that we do have. There is a National Family Caregiver Program, and it's a program that's been out there for 20 years. And Kay Bonigs, who you see there, is our specialist. Anybody would benefit from Kay's long experience too in that area. And those are the kinds of services that are available in the Family Caregiver Program. This is part of the Lifelong Links. It's a one-stop shop kind of thing where not only aging services, but services for disabled adults and people over the age of 18. Another guide for families that are approaching caregiving, courtesy of AARP. You can see the content of that. Website at the base here. Information in your hands. A brand new perspective on caregiving just out for generations. The Family Caregiver Alliance, another national group that has tremendous resources for caregivers. And I did it. So, thanks.
Thank you for watching. For more information on the Embrace Aging series, please visit calvincommunity.org. We now invite you to discuss the following questions.